Developed by Ryuga Gotoku Studio and published by Sega in 2018, originally for the Sony PlayStation 4, was Judgment. Takayuki Yagami continues as a private detective in a post-Yakuza Kamurocho. After being involved with the case of a new type of cure for dementia, details later had it turn into a massive conspiracy that those involved would seek to potentially suppress the cure due to a variety of circumstances, and a conspiracy that became something that no one had ever expected. Early on in Judgment, Yagami met Tsukino Saotome through circumstances in the game. The exact details had a few of her undergarments being stolen by drone when she left them to dry after they were cleaned. Herself and her brother Yosuke Saotome suspected the Professor Pante, a depraved individual who had been stealing women's undergarments throughout the area. Yagami was hired to not only find Tsukino's missing clothing but to stop the professor from stealing other women's undergarments as well. Eventually, the professor is arrested and Tsukino and Yosuke thank Yagami for his help. Yagami is later contacted by Yosuke and routinely asked if he was interested in his sister Tsukino. Apparently, the whole incident with the Pante professor left her a bit shaken mentally and found comfort with Yagami's professional attitude and stable presence during the case. The player as Yagami is given choices as to if he could or should be in a potential relationship with Tsukino. As there are doubts in his mind, Tsukino is later groped by As Ketchum, and the incident once again shakes Tsukino's confidence in herself, as Yosuke asks for Yagami's help once again to bring the individual to justice. Yosuke later asks for Yagami's help with the creep and peep while near a local love hotel, but the details were actually that he cheated on his long-distance girlfriend, who is actually Tsukino's good friend. The situation had Tsukino being disgusted with Yosuke and Yagami being there for her once again. Yosuke again mentions that Yagami would be a good boyfriend for his sister. Although Yagami doesn't exactly believe them to be good for a relationship, Yagami is curious as to why Tsukino is always in these sorts of situations. Yosuke later tells Yagami that he too noticed that Tsukino had been in trouble many times lately. Yagami still doesn't think too much of anything. Eventually, during a particular outing with Yosuke and Tsukino, the both are separated from one another and she ends up in an alleyway where Giant Impact finds her. Later exposing himself to her, Tsukino is frightened and horrified. Upon finding out what had occurred, Yosuke asks Yagami to find Giant Impact and to make him pay. Eventually, Giant Impact is arrested and Tsukino thanks Yagami for always helping her. After all that had occurred, Tsukino later becomes depressed when Yosuke asks Yagami to spend time with her. As a result, this is what finally caused the both of them to start their relationship. Arguably considered to be the canon relationship that Yagami had during the game, reception to Tsukino was mostly positive, but players often remarked about the age difference between Tsukino and Yagami. Also in the game, she and Yosuke mentioned that her age being in the mid to late teens, and Yagami being in his mid to late 30s. As such a massive gap in age was something that Yagami didn't necessarily like, and only through the player choosing to be with Tsukino did Yagami eventually accept to do so. Out of all the girlfriends that the player had the choice of being with in the game, Tsukino was in the peril the most often, and the circumstances of her perils were quite graphic. In the game, Yosuke gave impressions that the reason why Tsukino was in such situations was because of her innocence, and the fact that she was too naive with her life. Yagami later agreed with Yosuke's claims on the fact that Yagami desired to protect Tsukino was another reason for the relationship. Despite the character being reacted to positively, the relationship was neutral according to opinions of the time. This was later confirmed in Lost Judgment, where the default relationship that Yagami had was with Emily Mochizuki, a woman of a biracial background, but more importantly, in Yagami's own age range. Opinions further held that this was done in part to the neutrality of Tsukino's relationship to Yagami in Judgment. However, Ryuga Gotoku developers knew that the character of Tsukino Saotome was mostly reacted to positively as mentioned, so in downloadable content for Lost Judgment, Tsukino later returned as an an optional romantic choice for Yagami. In this scenario, due to all that she had suffered during the events of Judgment, she had selective amnesia due to her trauma, and this was one of the reasons why she separated herself from Yagami despite everything that had occurred. When the pair later reunited in Lost Judgment, both were grateful for having met and being together. Sometimes a character can be forgotten because the age of consent was something that was a factor in the character being forgotten.